We all love characters. We love watching them grow and change. We love seeing how hardships affect them. We love watching heroic acts as well as acts of villainy. We all have characters we love and characters we hate. While everyone is entitled to their own opinion about characters, I think it is safe to say that there are people who mischaracterize or over idolize characters. A couple of examples that come to mind are people who idolize Patrick Bateman from American Psycho or Walter White from Breaking Bad. Now, people are allowed to like these characters, but to say that you want to be like them, or you are like them, or they did nothing wrong is a bit of a problem. Walter White is a cautionary tale of pride and greed. You should not want to be like or end up like he did. However, this also goes the other way. There are characters that people mischaracterize or overhate. Now, overhating can come from a lot of different things. I would say people overhate Rey from Star Wars. Some people hate her because she is a woman, some people hate her because she's in the sequels, and some people think her writing sucks. Now, do not get me wrong, I don't care for the sequels, nor do I really care for her character, but she definitely gets way too much hate. And now I want to talk about another character who I believe is a bit mischaracterized and overhated, that being R from Passage. Now, unless you are one of the people I sent this video to specifically, you most likely don't know who R is or what Passage is, so allow me to give you a quick rundown. Passage is a play by Christopher Chen and is based off the novel A Passage to India by E.M. Forster. Before I get started with talking about the story and characters, there is something I need to address. Passage is a play I was in, so what you're about to hear will be a mix primarily of text from the script as well as my own personal experience within the production. There were gender differences between our production and the script, and I will be calling the characters by the gender that performed them. For example, B in the script is female, while in our production was a male, so I will address B as he, him. Another difference between our production and the script is how we portray the two countries. In the script, there are two countries: Country X, which is the setting for the show and where most of the characters are from, and Country Y, the country who is colonized or imperialized Country X, and where the rest of the characters are from. Now, how we actually represented the two doesn't actually affect too much of what I'm going to talk about, but it still needs to be addressed. In our production, Country X was made to be a bit more primitive and caveman like. This was primarily done through how they moved, socialized, and what they wore. Meanwhile, Country Y was made to be high tech and robotic, which is also shown through movement, speech, and costumes. That might not sound particularly great on paper, but it worked in practice. So now that I've given a bit more context, let's review the main parts of the story. The play begins with Q, one of the main characters and a person from Country Y, talking about how excited she is to move and truly live in Country X, where she will be joining her fiance R, another person from Country Y. Scene 2 is Q talking to F, another main character and person from Country Y, and them getting to know one another. In the end, they agree to go and explore Country X together at some point. Scene 3 revolves around a debate between H and M, both from Country X, that Dr. B, the last of our main characters and another Country X citizen, is asked to help decide on. The debate is whether or not someone from Country X can truly be friends with someone from Country Y. H argues that the answer is no. Country Y holds too much power over X, and that no matter how hard two people might try, the power difference will always be too difficult to overcome. M argues that it is possible despite the power difference. If both parties are trying and willing and can change their mindsets, they can become friends. B listens to both perspectives and in the end agrees more with H, as he has not had great experiences with people from Country Y. At the end of the scene, B is called to the hospital for an emergency, despite it being his day off. He makes his way there and ends up an hour late due to the roads being blocked by protests caused by a Country X boy being thrown in jail for stealing batteries. When he arrives, Dr. D, a Country Y doctor, tells him off for being late and dismisses him. After leaving the hospital, B makes his way to a temple where G, a religious studies professor from Country X, helps to calm him down. B is left alone contemplating how he feels within the temple when F walks in. B is dismissive at first, but once he realizes that F seems to genuinely care about the place, he settles down. They begin to talk and learn about one another, and at the end of the scene, B agrees to take F to the caves, a very important place for people in Country X, and it is a place that can have a large impact on someone's life. Scene 7 has F in her house talking to a mosquito about her previous experience in the caves and if she is making the right choices in life. Scene 8 has Q and R playing a game and talking. The talking soon turns to arguing about what it means to be in country X as someone from country Y and how R has changed. The scene ends with Q saying that she'll be joining F at the caves later that week. R tells her that the caves can be dangerous and that she should bring protection. Scene 9 begins with Q, R, and J, a person from country Y who is in charge of security in country X, in a bar talking about the tension in the country as a country X boy has been thrown in jail over stealing batteries. J and R try to explain to Q that it is country X's law, but Q argues that it is they are abusing their power to gain even more control of country X. Q and R get into a bigger argument, which causes Q to run out. R follows her and tries to apologize, but Q doesn't want to hear it and claims that he has completely changed. Scene 11 has F and B getting ready for the caves as they get to know each other a bit more. While this is going on, G and S, who is H's assistant, are secretly watching them and comment on how they seem to be getting along. G asks S's opinion, and S says that F has no right to be in the country, no matter how pure her intentions may be. In scene 13, Q arrives and joins F and B, and Q and B are introduced. They soon head out on their way, but suddenly F stops and claims to not be feeling well and tells the others to go on without her. They do, and Q and B try to talk with one another, but they can't seem to get on the same page. Q claims that this is not like her and that she has been going through some things because of her fiance. Eventually, they arrive at the cave entrance, and B lets Q go in all by herself. Q enjoys her time for a short while before suddenly hearing strange noises. She calls out, but the only thing she hears back is a boom. She calls out again and is met with another boom. She pulls out a gun as footsteps approach her. When they stop, she says, "Oh, it's you," before strange sounds erupt, causing her to freak out, aim her gun, and shoot, ending Act 1. Act 2 begins with G addressing the audience and telling them a little bit about the show. Scene 2 picks up with H&M talking about how B has been arrested and accused of assault against Q. Neither of them believe that B would do something like that. Scene 3 has R meeting with J to talk about the situation with Q. While talking, R brings up that something seems off with Q's story, but J tells him not to let Q talk to anyone else or it could create problems for the case. Scene 4 takes place with B in a holding cell talking to H&M, and we hear B's side of the story. He says that he had let Q go in first so it'll be more mystical for her. But then he heard her scream, so he rushes in, and when he reaches her, she shoots at him and then runs out. B is stunned, and when he leaves the caves and heads back, he is arrested. B asks if Q has been arrested yet, but H&M tell him no. He flips out and says that he is fully on H's side now. Scene 5 has F talking to a gecko in her house about her original experience in the cave. She had gone in with a group of people, and when one of them had called out, there was no echo, but instead a muffled boom. Everyone then tried to shout out to hear an echo, but everyone only heard booms, and F started to fear that she was losing herself. That experience is why she didn't go with Q and B as she got scared. F then goes to talk to Q to hear her side of the story, where Q eventually admits that it was not B she saw in the caves, but R. She says that it looked like him, but something was off, and then suddenly he began to change into a creature and rush towards her, and that is why she shot her gun. In scene 7, it cuts to some time later with F and B celebrating as Q has dropped the charges. Everything seems friendly at first, but F says that she is still in contact with Q. This upsets B, and the two start to get into an argument over whose side F is really on and whether or not F is a true friend to B. In the end, B seems to conclude that F does not have what it takes to be a true friend of B's. The show ends with G addressing the audience one final time, explaining what happened to these characters and making a plea. Q returned to country Y, F died of a disease, and B was reinstated at the hospital. Before F had died, she and B had met a couple more times, but it was never the same. G then asks the audience to stay with her despite the increase in chaos happening, and the play ends. And there we have it, the overall story of Passage. Now, I skipped over a ton of small details, but I believe it is important to understand the overall story for context and what it is trying to say. So now, let's finally get started with talking about R. Now, upon watching, listening to, or reading the story for the first time, you might find that R is not the most appealing character. He seems to constantly be arguing with Q, is friends with a very powerful person from country Y, and says some questionable things. Now, when I first read this script, I didn't really care for R. I thought he kinda sucked. When I read for him during callbacks, he didn't seem too bad as they picked some of his better moments, but the thought was still on my mind. I ended up being cast for R. Shocking, the guy making a video defending him got cast as him. When we had our first table read, I portrayed him as this cocky, kinda selfish know it all. That version of him seems to be what most people have in mind when thinking about R. It wasn't until people started to joke that R was the worst, as in the most evil person in the show, and once I really started working with the script, that my view on him started to change. So now let's take a deep dive into R's scenes. Our first proper introduction to R is in scene 8. It starts with R and Q playing some sort of board or card game. R asks Q about them going to get drinks with Jay the next night. Q asks a bit more about Jay, and R explains how she is the security liaison and that is complicated between country Y and X. They go back to their game when R says he is glad that Q is there. Q then talks about how much he is enjoying her time in Country X and that there is something special about it. R agrees. Q then brings up that she has plans to go explore Country X with F. Up until this point, R seems nice. He openly cares about Q and states he had a similar experience when he first came. However, this is where he starts to falter. Q asks if he has any friends who are local or native. R replies, teasing, native, like some native specimens you can observe? Q says she meant people born in Country X, and R replies, most of the locals are native born, I think. Q then asks why R is being mean. R is confused, saying that it was just a joke, but he apologizes. Now, in my opinion, this really isn't bad. He was more playing off of her use of native. However, it still isn't the best thing to joke about, even if he wasn't actually calling country Xers native specimens. The bigger flaw here is that he clearly doesn't have any real country X friends. Moving on. R asks if Q wants to spend more time at local places, to which she responds with a yes. R says he can take her to those places. This is where he really begins to stumble. Instead of just leaving it off there, he says, though to be honest, those places aren't that different from, more mainstream places, after you've been here for a while. When Q asks what he means, he explains that the place they went last night was Country X Food, but was owned by Country Y. In the end, he concedes and says that they can still go out to eat the more local stuff. Q calls out R's use of the word mainstream, and R fights back by saying that she's making a big deal over nothing. Eventually, he stops himself and the two go back to their game. Unfortunately, R just can't end without her understanding, so he continues the conversation under his breath. Once it ends, he asks, I'm not going to have to walk on eggshells all the time, am I? To which Q responds by telling him he won't as long as he says the right things. R pauses before saying that Q might be being a bit judgmental. When she asks him to elaborate, he says, like maybe you have these expectations or something about how life in Country X should be, and when I don't make them happen, you get a little. Which Q finishes by saying judgy. Q then admits that she feels like she hasn't really done anything there yet and claims to possibly be a bit restless. R asks if they are cool, to which she responds by saying they are. Q then brings up that she and F plan to go to the caves, which throws R off. He tries to be accommodating but fails, leading Q to snap at him by claiming that he has become weird and jaded, especially when it comes to Country X. R responds with, I guess you do become more in tune with your home country out here. You put up some boundaries. But I'll try to act less jaded. He then tells her to be careful at the caves as there are wild animals and people have been killed, and that Q will need protection. Q agrees and says that R has changed a little, which he responds by saying, Welcome to Country X. Ending Scene 8. Now, this is not the best introduction to R, however, it establishes everything we need to know about him, most of which I will get to later. In my opinion, this scene isn't too bad for R. It's not great, but compared to what's coming up, it's not that bad. Throughout the scene, R is constantly adjusting to accommodate for Q. He apologizes for his joke, he agrees to go to more local places, and when he keeps having to make correction, he asks if this is how it's always going to be. Q doesn't help by saying, not if you say the right things. With R backed into a corner, he tries to explain how he feels, and while doing that, he tiptoes around what he is saying because he knows it's not great, but it is his truth. By saying these things, he gets the initial reaction he was expecting, but it allows the conversation to move on. They get to the point where they can agree things are a little off, and R is the one to ask if they are and can be cool. The next thing that happens is Q bringing up going to the caves, which throws R off. I believe R genuinely thinks the caves are dangerous, but after having just made things better, he doesn't want to ruin it. So he once again tries to be accommodating by trying to downplay the caves, and then he says they're probably great. This causes Q to snap, saying that she believes R has become weird and jaded. R at least tried to tiptoe when he had something negative to say. In the end, he says he will try to act less jaded and tells Q to be careful at the caves. We see that he does care for Q throughout this scene. Unfortunately, more negative circumstances take the forefront of this scene. Now on to scene 9. This scene starts with R, J, and Q presumably at a countrywide bar, which kind of immediately throws out R's statement that they would go to more local places out the window. The justification of this comes from Jay when she says that it's their official statement suggestion right now that Country Y citizens avoid local Country X establishments. The reason for this is because of tensions and protests surrounding a Country X boy getting thrown in jail for stealing batteries. Jay goes on a little spiel about how she knows it looks bad, but at the end of the day, it's their law. You steal, you go to jail. That's on their books. Q doesn't seem to agree with this, saying it's how you enforce the law that matters, and they are using their rules to take advantage of Country X. Jay mocks her use of take advantage, and Q reciprocates the mocking by saying, I don't mean you personally are taking advantage, or to R, you. Mind you, R has been on Jay's side throughout the conversation, and he responds by saying, but you kind of are saying that, right? R claims that because they are countrywide citizens, that means they must be a part of the problem. He then states that the business between country X and Y is legitimate, which Q responds by saying how they are using the guise of legitimacy to pretty much usurp a country. The three then get into an argument where Q claims the current president of Country X is a puppet of Country Y, which R responds by saying, look, you don't know what you're talking about, causing the two to get into a heated argument which ends with Q leaving. Now, this is a bad scene for R. So bad, in fact, that opening night people cheered when I got a drink poured on my head. And I honestly can't blame them, as there isn't much to defend here, especially with the end. My one argument for the scene is the fact that R truly believes what Jay is saying. I believe that as far as he is aware, there is nothing wrong with throwing the kid in jail. That's just the law. Now, that is still not a great thing, but that's what happens when your best or possibly only friend happens to be someone working in security who is on the wrong side. Scene 10 takes place immediately after, with R chasing after Q, trying to apologize. Now, to be honest, I don't know how genuine this apology is. I would like to believe that he is at least a little bit sorry for what he said to or about her, but not sorry for what he said about his beliefs. I really can't defend him when he asks, what more do you want me to say? Because that means he just wants to get out of trouble. Q's response to this is that R is a completely different person, which R disagrees with, and it ends with Q saying, then I guess I'm very confused. Once again, another bad scene for R. I could try to argue that he at least tried to apologize, but that's really scraping the bottom of the barrel. And now we are jumping to Act 2, Scene 3, with R's final scene. Now, I need to quote pretty much the entirety of the scene as every line of dialogue counts. So we are doing this English class style where I'll be stopping to talk after everything I deem important. The scene starts presumably at Jay's office, where Jay asks R, where's Q? R, at our place. J, good. R, she hasn't left the house once since. J, she needs to stay there. It's not safe in the streets for her. R nods. These protests, no, riots are getting out of hand. It's vandalism and barbarism now, and people at home wonder why we are so severe. Slight beat. R. What about these attempted murder charges against Q? Are they serious? And here is where we are stopping for now. This is where my true defense of R begins. This scene starts out as normal with J and R talking. R seems a bit off due to the circumstances, but is overall fine with J. However, there is a clear shift. J. She needs to stay there. It's not safe in the streets for her. R nods. This shows he is agreeing with her or accepting what she is saying. These protests, no, riots, are getting out of hand. It's vandalism and barbarism now, and people at home wonder why we are so severe. Slight beat. This slight beat changes everything for R. This is the moment he realizes he might be on the wrong side. The evidence for this is how the next thing he says is R. What about these attempted murder charges against Q? Are they serious? Here he is changing the subject back to Q. He doesn't care about the protests or riots or how this is all being viewed, he only cares about Q. Another thing is how J says, and people at home wonder why we are so severe, directly contradicting her earlier statement that they are simply enforcing the laws strictly by the book. R is realizing this all within that slight beat. He's picking up on the truth now and realizing he may have been on the wrong side. Continuing with the scene, R. What about these attempted murder charges against Q? Are they serious? J. No, they're not. R. Are you sure? J. It's posturing, a desperate attempt to change the story. Don't worry about it. I'll make sure it doesn't go anywhere. I know people. R. Thanks. J. She's brave to have defended herself like that. How's she doing? R. She's a little, uh, J. Scared. R. More than that, really, uh, down, like despondent or something. J. Well, after what she's been through. R. She won't talk about it. J. Well, yeah, the trauma. Beat. R. But uh, she's never really told me the story, what happened. J. But the police report, you read the R. Yes. J. So she told the story once, doesn't want to tell it again. What's the problem? R. I don't know. Something feels weird. Alright, there's a bit to unpack here. The beat after Jay says, well, yeah, the trauma is Art contemplating what to tell Jay. His views have been shaken, but he still values Jay as a friend and wants to confide in her, but isn't sure if he should. He ends up doing so, saying, but she's never really told me the story, what happened. This is something that has been on his mind, and he wants his friend's support. Unfortunately for him, Jay goes straight to facts and rationality. However, this changes after R says, I don't know, something feels weird. I would like to highlight this line because it once again shows that he knows and cares for Q. He knows that there is something off with her and wants to help, but she won't let him in. However, this ends up being a slip for R, as Jay's response is not words of encouragement or comfort, but instead an accusation. Jay, slightly irritated. Weird. How? Pause. Is she talking? At all? R. No. J. Don't let her talk to anyone else. R. Why not? J. We're building a case for her. So if she's acting weird and despondent, if she's unreliable in any way, R. Thanks again for everything you're doing. J. We're all behind you. We stick together. And that ends the scene. Clearly, Jay does not like what she is hearing about Q, as it could jeopardize public support or their foothold in Country X. Jay doesn't care about Q, she cares about the power the case can give. Meanwhile, R is the complete opposite, only caring about Q. R truly realizes this when Jay starts asking questions and implying that what Q has going on is bad for the case. He even ends up cutting Jay off. Jay, we're building a case for her, so she's acting weird and despondent. If she's unreliable in any way, R, thanks again for everything you're doing. Jay doesn't get to finish that line because R doesn't want her to finish that train of thought. He doesn't want to hear it. He knows now who Jay really is, and I believe he understands the man he has become. And I really want to emphasize that. The man he has become. Because we know R was not always like that. In scene 8, Q says, "But I think you've become weird and jaded." Yes, about Country X, it's not like you. And you've changed a little bit. We get the most evidence in scene 10. Q. You're R. What? Q. You're a completely different person. R. I'm not a completely different person. Q. No, you are. You are. You never say those things to me back home. You are a completely different person. Beat. I'm the same person I always was. Hate to break it to you. Pause. Q. Then I guess I'm very confused. Then there is scene 14 where Q is talking to B. Q. I'm just going through some things, I think. So I'm a little. I had a fight with my fiance, so. B. Q. He's really changed out here, is the thing. So I feel a bit lonely here, I guess, to be perfectly honest with you. And finally, in Act 2, Scene 6, when Q is telling F what she really saw in the caves. That's who I think I see. R. But how did he get here? What's happening to me? And as I look at him, suddenly my future, my past, myself start crumbling away. Because it's so clear to me now that this man I staked my life on, is not the man I thought. R also has lines that hint he was different before. In scene 8 he says, like what we were saying before, how everything feels so real here, right? So all this PC stuff starts to feel like a bunch of word games, you know? And in Country Y, we just talk and talk and talk about it, but here we're actually living it. Does that make sense? He also says, I guess you do become more in tune with your home country out here. You put up some boundaries. And finally, after Q says, You've changed a little bit, he says, Welcome to Country X. Then in scene 9 he says, But you don't. You don't. I mean, we all used to read about all the terrible things Country Y is doing in Country X, but it's just not true. When you're here, it's just not. All of this is proof that R was different back in Country Y. He was most likely a lot closer to how Q is in the script, caring about what's going on in Country X. He talks a lot about how back in Country Y things were different, what they read and talked about. Unfortunately, without Q to help ground him, and his only friend in the script being Jay, he lost that side of himself. He was able to be manipulated and tricked into believing that what was going on really wasn't that bad. Unfortunately, by the time he realizes his mistake, the damage is already done. The reason the events in the cave happen are because he changed. The cave manifested Q's fear and inner thoughts about R. The only reason that R begins to realize his flaws is because of what happened in the caves. He sees who Jay really is and realizes he is on the wrong side. As glad as I am that he was able to realize his faults, it sucks that it took the worst thing happening to Q for that change to begin. Before I move on to some more of my final thoughts, I want to bring up a connection I saw between this show and Andor real quick. Now, if you have not watched Andor, please either stop this and watch the entirety of Andor and come back, or just skip this segment. Andor is one of the best pieces of media I've ever seen, and it is my favorite show, and I highly recommend watching it as it blows everything in this video out of the water, so I don't want to give any spoilers. Alright, if you are still here, I want to make a connection between R and Cyril. They both go through a relatively similar journey. Both are on the wrong side, believing that what they are doing is right. This is then fueled by pretty much their only connection being to someone who works for security and has a position of power on the wrong side, feeding them lies. It is not until it is too late that they begin to understand the error of their ways. In R's case, it's when Q has her incident and Jay shows her true colors. For Cyril, it's when he realizes that what is going on in Gorman was actually a plan to take over the planet. I didn't properly make this connection until I really read Act 2, Scene 3, when I saw the pause and how R tried to change the subject. When I realized that R then shared this journey that Cyril, one of my favorite characters of all time, it got me so much more invested in the character and portraying his story. I had found the proof that R was not that bad and had something to connect it to. I even brought this up a little in an interview thing I had to do. What do you love about this character? I love R because of his arc and the little journey he goes through. It's not a big one, it's not a grand one, but he does have this clear and present arc in the show. And I just, it clicks with me so well because it's very similar to an arc that one of my favorite characters of all time goes through. And when I saw that connection or that similarity, I was like, oh my gosh, I get to almost play this same character who I love. And that was a great, great feeling. And I love getting to just see reading that moment when I really saw that, oh, this is who R really is, um was just such a great moment for me. And yeah, I just love R. Even if he's not the best, I love R. In the end, this is the reason I fought the hardest for R, so I could try to portray a story so close to another one I love. Now on to one last thing I want to talk about before wrapping up. In Act 2, Scene 7, F mentions that R had left Q. Now, that is the only discussion on the topic in the play, so a lot of what I'm about to say is purely headcanon. I think it is very important that it is R who left Q and not Q who left R. Now, you could view this as his last act of being horrible, but I would like to believe that it came from a more selfless place. So we know that R did not know Q's true story originally, but he did know something was off with the one she had. We also know that Q did change her story, as B says, I know that you're the one who got her to change her story. However, we don't know what exactly Q changed her story to. It could be everything she told F, or it could be that she just said that B didn't actually try to attack her. Let's imagine it's the former. Q tells the whole truth. Now imagine how that would affect R. He would learn that the whole incident was caused not by some attack, but because of Q's manifestation of who he had become. This would have come after he had realized he was on the wrong side and that he had changed from who Q thought he was. I think getting hit with all of this in such a short amount of time might have broken him. If I'm right about all this, with all realizing what he had become in Act 2, Scene 3, and even if he wants to change, how do you go forward with all this? You were on the wrong side. You said some bad stuff. You got into fights with your fiance, and you are the reason that a horrible event happened. I think he left because he knew it was too late, that he had done too much damage. Now, of course, this is purely my belief. There's no hard evidence, and I have a massive bias, but I believe the plausibility is there. Of course, the other options are that it was just one last act of R sucking, or in the end, R continued to be on J's side and left when the case didn't end how they thought it would. And now, on to wrapping it all up. Now, I've done a lot of defense for R in this video, but I do want to make it clear I am not trying to argue that R is actually a really good guy who's just misunderstood and is actually the hero and best character in the show. That is not what I'm doing. I'm simply trying to explain that he might not be as bad as he seems. I also want to make it clear that R is not my favorite character in the show. That goes to F. F is actually a really good person throughout the entirety of the show. However, I formed a very strong connection to R. This is the strongest I've ever connected to and worked on a character, and that is what has led me to defend him so hard. So once again, I hope you see that R isn't that bad. Yes, he has his flaws and mistakes, but that's because he is human, just like all the other characters in the show. And that's one of the best things about Passage. All of the characters are human. They run off of human emotions, thoughts, and actions. Everything that happens in the show is because they are humans trying to connect yet failing. We want to watch them succeed, yet time and time again they fail because they are human. And this is one specific thing I really liked about our show that I didn't even really consider until writing this. As I said before, people from Country X were presented more like cavemen, while those from Country Y were presented more like robots. Despite being represented by things that are specifically not human, that shouldn't think, act, or feel like them, countrywide characters are arguably the most human characters in the show, and I think R specifically does a great job of representing this. And with all that being said, I hope you can see where I'm coming from with R, and hopefully you can see him as I do. And now, before I end, I want to thank and dedicate this video to the cast, crew, and the people who saw the production. If it weren't for them constantly joking about how much R sucks, I wouldn't have worked so hard to prove them wrong. I wouldn't have looked so carefully at the text and worked on what R is really saying, doing, and feeling during the scenes he is in. This experience pushed me to become closer to a character than ever before, and it will forever change how I work on characters I play. I just hope that at the end of the day, someone who watched the show saw even a fraction of what I saw in R. If not, that sucks, but at the very least, I tried my hardest to get that across with an R production of the show. This absolute passion project of a video, something different from what I normally make, wouldn't have been made without my cast, crew, and friends. So once again, I would like to thank them. And with that, we have my defense of R. Now, I have a couple more things I want to bring up about the show that aren't specifically R related or don't fit anywhere else, so if you want to hear that, stick around. If not, you are free to go. And I would like to thank you for watching my video. Alright, last things I want to talk about. Number one, I could not have a video talking about R without bringing up the absolute fire costume I had, and this is the only thing y'all will be seeing from the actual production. This bad boy was hands down the best costume in the show, and it was the most expensive. That is not my fault. That was up to the costume designers and makers, but I appreciate it. I wish I had gone to wear this thing more because I love it, but it is what it is. I truly hope that I can get this thing for myself one day, as when else are you going to use this thing for a show? On top of that, it's fitted for me, and I'm relatively small, and it's not even fully finished, so I see no reason not to give it to me. I would even pay for it. All that being said, I loved this costume. On to a more serious topic. One of the biggest differences between our production and the script for R is that Jay is a male in the script, but female in the show. Now, I want to make it clear RJ did a phenomenal job and was great to work with. However, I will talk about how I think this change took a little bit away from the script. Now, Jay is most definitely written to act more like a guy in the script, and honestly, there isn't a problem with Jay being female. The real problem comes from the fact that our director had wanted R to have had an affair with Jay prior to Q joining them in Country X, or that at the very least they had been in a relationship previously. Now, obviously, this throws out nearly everything I was saying about trying to defend R and how much he truly cared for Q, so I really didn't like this idea, and there's no textual evidence for it, and there was no real way to properly show this in this show anyway. Now, I'm not exactly sure how RJ felt about this, but neither of us leaned into it at any point from what I could tell. But for all you R haters out there, there is hypothetically a version where R has cheated on Q and most likely leaves her and ends up with J. However, I'm going to say that is not what happened, so too bad. And finally, some highlights of other characters being bad, if not worse than R. H is blatantly racist throughout the entirety of the show. S has a whole spiel about how people from Country Y shouldn't be in Country X. I don't even need to talk about J. Q is not worse than R, but at the beginning of the show, she admits she has romanticized Country X. F has to point out to her that Country X is under Y control. She fumbles and says some of the most tourist sounding things to be. She says she thought that Country Xers would be nicer and more accommodating. Now, this was coming from a good place, but it did not come out well. A similar thing happens when she's talking to Jay. Yes, Jay is in the wrong, but meeting them for the first time and the first thing you do is flame their job in front of them is low key wild. Of course, she also shoots a gun at B and falsely accuses him, and it takes F to get her to change her story. And finally, B. Now, I can't say with 100% certainty that B is worse than R. However, I'm gonna leave that up to y'all. B is low-key racist. At the beginning of the show, he says he doesn't think that he could be friends with someone from Country Y. He's a little aggressive when he first meets F. In their first interaction, he jokingly asks if she is one of the good ones. He also says some low key sus stuff about relationships when talking to her later. He doesn't take super kindly to Q, but that's understandable after all the stuff she said. In Act 2, he says he is fully on H's side about not thinking someone from country X and Y could be friends. And finally, in Act 2, Scene 7, this guy lost me. Now, I understand he has gone through a lot and he's hurt that F is still in contact with Q, but he is absolutely unreasonable with F in the scene. He claims that he cannot be friends with F because she didn't get arrested with him. Like, what? The person who he has gone along with best throughout the entire show. Right? She was walking B back when the police came. She was demanding they let him go. He was innocent and the victim. She was wondering where they were going so she could be with him and even wonder if he had Ian so she might bring him some food. And this man has the audacity to be upset when she didn't pull him away from the police or fight them or get arrested as well, despite having done nothing? And he claims that a real friend would do that. I'm sorry, B. Would you do that? I don't remember you having such a big backbone when talking to your boss earlier, but yeah, go ahead. I'm 100% sure your friend H, who is racist, owns a mansion, has a servant, and does nothing, would definitely do that for you. Like, maybe hypothetically, M might do that. But I'm leaning more on the he wouldn't side. But yeah, that's a totally reasonable request for someone you've only known for a week. So I'm sorry, B, if at the end of the day, I think you kinda suck. And that ends the other characters doing bad things. And I know that people doing worse things than R doesn't make him better, but you gotta admit, other people in the show kinda suck too, and he is not the worst. So, now, if you have made it all the way to the end, thank you. Once again, I hope you can see where I'm coming from and that you have realized R is not that bad. For the last time, I would like to thank you for watching my video.